After the Germans invaded Poland in September 1939, the country was put to the sword by death squads and executioners who wanted to purge the elite of the country. Millions during World War II died inside of Poland. Civilians, persecuted people, and soldiers fought against the terror of the German and Nazi regime, and the occupation of the country was truly horrific. After each German army advancement, executions took place, and people were rounded up, and were then shot inside of massive pits that they had been forced to dig. The city of Warsaw also suffered terribly. It was heavily bombed from the air on the first day of the war, but within 4 weeks, the German troops captured the Polish capital. However, they quickly sought to put their persecuting policies into action, and they also carried out many executions to strike fear into the hearts of the population. But the first public execution inside of Warsaw, and possibly of World War II, saw a young 24-year-old female resistor be taken to a firing range, and she was then shot in front of a crowd. But who was this woman who was shot in the execution, and what did she do that was so terrible in the eyes of the German occupiers? To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Elzbieta Zahorska was born on the 6th of June 1915. Her family were very religious and patriotic, and her father was a well-known chess player and a lawyer. Her mother was a poet. She had 4 siblings, and her sisters died in later the Warsaw Uprising during World War II. She had a relatively normal early life and moved to Poland in 1918. She studied communications and then worked inside of a post office. But later she then studied at the University of Warsaw in the capital city. She took part in the women's military training program and learned how to handle weapons, and this training would be invaluable for her. As the Second World War broke out inside of Poland, Elzbieta signed up to join the army, and she was posted to become a telegraph operator and also a liaison officer. She was known for being involved in dangerous missions, and she even carried out her orders on horseback under constant fire from the German enemy. She was known also for her beauty, but to the Germans, female soldiers were the worst, and they were seen as a backwards policy of Bolshevism and communism, and Hitler and the Nazis believed that women should be nowhere near the battlefield. Elzbieta was arrested by the Germans twice. The first time, Wehrmacht soldiers arrested her as she was involved in an anti-aircraft defence battery, trying to shoot down planes, and she also destroyed weapons which were about to be captured, so the enemy could not use them. But she then managed to somehow escape, and a warrant for her arrest was issued. But she had already been sentenced to death for her crimes. Elzbieta travelled back to Warsaw under a false name, but a few weeks later she was arrested again, as she and another woman were seen tearing down a German propaganda poster that blamed England or the British for starting World War II. This was seen in the eyes of the Germans as an act of sabotage, and for the German occupiers of the city, this was viewed as a terrible crime of defiance. She was then identified as a woman who had previously escaped, and she was sent to Pawiak prison inside Warsaw, where she was locked up within the terribly overcrowded and terribly staffed site. Pawiak was known for its brutality, and around 37,000 people lost their lives inside and around the prison in the war years. Eventually, makeshift firing ranges were even made in the rubble around the prison. As she was transported to Pawiak, Elzbieta screamed out her name, and people passed on information to her family that she had been arrested. She was allowed to see her family, and she had asked for a final wish, that she be brought cookies and gloves. Her family told her to be a good Polish woman who was always devoted to God and her homeland, and her execution was then to take place. Now the Germans sought to punish Elzbieta severely, but also to terrorise the population by showing the execution of the young woman to a crowd of thousands. The day of her execution was the 2nd of November 1939, and on the way to the site of her execution, Fort Bema, she sang songs. The prison priest or chaplain was allowed to remain with her, and even the soldiers who were appointed to oversee her execution admired her bravery. It was said by the priest who accompanied her on that final journey that, "I will never forget that girl's face, with its shapely and determined features, or the look in her large blue eyes. Dressed in a soldier's tunic, she was completely calm, and betrayed not the slightest fear or anxiety. I knew she was fighting with a weapon in her hand." Then she arrived at the fort. There were thousands of people who gathered to witness her execution. These were not curious spectators, these were the people of Warsaw who were forced by the German soldiers to witness the proceedings. They were dragged out of their homes to see a young woman be shot to strike fear into their hearts. Inside of the fort was an embankment, and Elzbieta Zahorska was led out to the firing range, and opposite her stood a collection of German soldiers dressed in their military uniform. They were armed with rifles, and there was one of these stood further back, and it was his job to give the command. She was offered a blindfold, but refused this, and it was claimed that her last words were, "Poland has not perished yet." With this, the firing squad were given their order to raise their rifles, and they did. They took aim, and then rapidly shot into the young woman, Elzbieta, and she instantly fell to the floor. But there was actually another woman who was executed straight after Elzbieta. Eugenia Vlodza was brought out next, and she was condemned to death for slapping a German soldier. She was also then shot in exactly the same manner. Some in the crowd wept and sobbed as they'd seen the life of two young women be taken away by the occupiers, and it would be a sign of more terror to come. Inside of Warsaw within months, bodies were strung up from buildings and lampposts, and public executions were carried out in the open on a daily basis. Some were shot inside of town squares, whilst others watched on, and these people had committed no crimes at all. Warsaw as a city suffered horrifically during World War II. There was a terrifying ghetto established in which persecuted Jewish people were forced and systematically starved. Later these would be sent to the extermination camps, where they lost their lives within minutes of arriving. It was also the site of huge uprisings, which led to the destruction of the Polish capital, in which buildings were burned down and thousands were killed in unprecedented acts of violence carried out by the German forces. But the execution of Elzbieta Zahorska was possibly the first public execution of World War II, and the first public one carried out inside of a city in which hundreds and thousands would also meet the same fate. She was incredibly brave when led to her execution, and the people of the city took great courage from her boldness. But she was in her mid-20s when she was shot by people who months earlier had rampaged into her lands. She fought the Germans as best as she could, but they condemned her and brought her life to a shocking end in a terrifying sight. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.